Amara stood at the edge of the school's hallway, watching the sea of students move like a well-practiced machine, one she had never been a part of. For years she had been invisible, just another face in the crowd, but not today. Today, she was going to break the silence, to stand up for herself, even if it meant standing alone. The thought of it sent a wave of nerves through her, but something deeper, something stronger, pushed her forward. Because for once, being invisible wasn't an option anymore. Before we get started, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know where you're watching from. Let's dive in. Amara pulled her jacket tightly around herself as she stepped off the school bus, the cool morning air nipping at her cheeks. The familiar sight of the high school loomed ahead, a place that, despite the years she had spent there, never quite felt like home. She straightened her posture and took a deep breath, her mind already preparing for the subtle dismissals and whispered remarks that had become a part of her daily routine. Inside the building, the hallways were buzzing with excitement. Election season was in full swing, and it seemed like every wall was covered in bright, flashy posters announcing various candidates for the upcoming student council elections. Amara scanned the faces in the posters as she made her way to her locker. There was Sarah, the girl who could win over an audience with just a smile. Emma, the class favorite with a long list of extracurriculars. And Jason, the athlete everyone seemed to admire. It wasn't lost on Amara that none of these faces looked like hers. For as long as she could remember, Amara had been different. She was one of only a handful of black students in the school, a fact that set her apart in ways she couldn't control. It wasn't that anyone said anything overtly mean, but there was always that lingering sense of being on the outside looking in. She was never invited to the weekend hangouts, never asked to join the study groups. The other students weren't malicious, just oblivious. But the effect was the same. She felt invisible. Today was no different. As she walked to her locker, she overheard a group of girls from her English class huddled together, giggling as they compared their campaign slogans. Amara had always harbored a secret dream of running for student council, of having her voice heard, of being a leader. But that dream seemed impossible here. She couldn't shake the feeling that no one would ever take her seriously. Amara! She turned at the sound of her name and saw Sarah walking toward her. Her heart skipped a beat. Maybe, just maybe, this was the moment things would change. "Hey," Amara replied, her voice tinged with hope. "We're having a campaign meeting after school," Sarah said, her tone casual, but her eyes held a spark of excitement. "You should come." Amara blinked, her heart racing. Was this it? Was she finally being included? The thought of being part of something bigger than herself sent a jolt of anticipation through her. "Sure," she said quickly. "I'd love to." Sarah smiled, though it was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Great. See you there." As Sarah walked away, Amara couldn't help but feel a swell of hope. Maybe this was her chance to be more than just the quiet girl who was always on the sidelines. Maybe this was her chance to finally be seen. The rest of the day passed in a blur of anticipation. She found it hard to focus in class, her mind racing with possibilities. What if she could really make a difference? What if she could show everyone that she had ideas, leadership potential, and the ability to create positive change? When the final bell rang, Amara practically sprinted to the library, where the meeting was being held. Her palms were sweaty, and her heart pounded in her chest as she opened the door. Inside, the room was buzzing with activity. Sarah was there, along with a group of other students, all gathered around a large table. "Hey, Amara," Sarah said with a quick nod before turning back to the group. "All right, let's get started." Amara found a seat at the edge of the group, trying to blend in while she listened. As the meeting progressed, she realized something unsettling. The more they talked, the more it became clear that this wasn't just a meeting for anyone interested in the election. This was a strategy session for Sarah's campaign. "So I was thinking we could focus on improving the school dances," Sarah was saying, her voice confident and authoritative. "That's something everyone cares about, right?" There were murmurs of agreement from the group, and Amara's heart sank. She had been invited, yes, but not as an equal. She was here to support Sarah's campaign, not to run her own. "Amara, what do you think?" Sarah asked suddenly, turning her attention toward her. Caught off guard, Amara stammered for a moment before finding her voice. I think that's a good idea," she said quietly, though inside her heart was sinking fast. Sarah smiled and nodded before turning back to the group. "All right, let's get to work." As the meeting wore on, Amara sat in silence, her earlier excitement slowly evaporating. She had been so hopeful, so eager to be part of something bigger, but now it was clear that she wasn't really part of anything. She was just there to fill a seat, to be a body in the room. The realization stung. By the time the meeting ended, Amara felt deflated. She left the library without saying much to anyone, her heart heavy with disappointment. As she walked home, the afternoon sun casting long shadows on the sidewalk, she couldn't shake the feeling that she would never truly belong. That night, Amara lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling. Her mind raced with thoughts of what could have been. She had wanted so badly to be part of the student council, to make a difference, to be a leader. But now, it seemed like that dream was slipping further and further away. The next morning, as she walked back into school, something in her had shifted. She no longer felt the same eagerness to be included. Instead, there was a growing sense of determination bubbling beneath the surface. If they wouldn't let her be a part of their world, maybe she needed to build her own. The idea was still forming in her mind, but it was there, a flicker of hope amid the frustration. And as she walked past the campaign posters and smiling faces in the hallway, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to be invisible anymore. The week that followed the campaign meeting felt like an emotional roller coaster for Amara. She couldn't shake the feeling of disappointment that had settled deep in her chest after realizing she had been invited to the meeting merely as an afterthought, not as an equal. As she navigated the familiar hallways of her high school, she became hyper-aware of the social dynamics that had always been there, but had now crystallized into something undeniable. She wasn't part of their world, and they weren't about to let her in. Amara had always known she was different. The whispers, the sideways glances, the subtle exclusion, these were all part of her daily life. But up until now, she had tried to brush it off. She had told herself that maybe if she worked hard enough, if she smiled enough, if she stayed out of trouble, they would accept her. She had clung to that hope for so long that letting it go felt like losing a part of herself. As she walked to her next class, she passed a group of students gathered around Sarah, who was handing out flyers for her campaign. Sarah's laughter rang through the hall, carefree and confident, while the group around her hung on her every word. Amara kept her head down, clutching her textbooks tightly as she hurried past. She couldn't help but feel a pang of envy. It wasn't just Sarah's popularity that stung. It was the ease with which she navigated the social world Amara had never been invited into. Amara reached her classroom and took her usual seat near the back, where she could observe without being observed. The teacher, Mr. Redding, was already at the front of the room, writing out the day's lesson on the board. As students trickled in, the usual chatter filled the air. Who was going to vote for whom, what the latest gossip was, what plans everyone had for the weekend. Amara, as usual, was not a part of these conversations. "All right, class, settle down," Mr. Redding said, turning to face them. "Today, we're going to be discussing the civil rights movement and its impact on contemporary society. I want you all to think about how these historical events continue to shape our world today." As Mr. Redding began his lecture, Amara tried to focus, but her mind kept drifting. Civil rights. It was a topic that should have resonated with her, that should have stirred something inside her, but right now, it only felt like a reminder of how little had changed. Sure, things were different from the days of segregation and overt racism, but the subtle exclusion she experienced every day was just a new version of the same old story. Her thoughts were interrupted when Mr. Redding asked a question to the class. "Can anyone give me an example of how racial inequality still exists in modern times?" A few hands shot up, but Mr. Redding's eyes scanned the room, landing on Amara. "Amara, what do you think?" he asked. Amara froze. She wasn't used to being called on, especially not for something like this. Her classmates turned to look at her, their expressions ranging from curiosity to mild surprise. She could feel the weight of their stares and her heart began to race. I think. Amara started, but the words stuck in her throat. What was she supposed to say? That she lived racial inequality every single day? That no matter how hard she tried, she would never truly be seen as one of them? Before she could continue, someone from the front of the class, she couldn't tell who, muttered, "Of course they'd ask her." There it was, that familiar sting. It was small, barely loud enough for the teacher to hear, but it was enough to remind her of her place. Amara felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she forced herself to keep going. "I think racial inequality still exists in the ways people are treated differently based on assumptions," she said quietly. "Like in school, for example. Some students might not get the same opportunities as others because of how they're perceived." There was a brief silence before Mr. Redding nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's a very important point, Amara. Thank you for sharing." But the silence from her classmates was deafening. No one nodded in agreement. No one followed up on what she had said. It was as if her words had evaporated into the air, leaving no trace behind. When class ended, Amara packed up her things quickly, eager to leave before anyone could say anything else. But as she walked toward the door, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see Jordan, a boy from her history class, standing behind her. "Hey, I thought what you said in class was really important," Jordan said, offering her a small awkward smile. "You're right. People don't always realize how much stuff like that happens." Amara blinked, surprised. Jordan wasn't someone she had spoken to much, but he was well-liked, friendly, and always seemed to be in the middle of things. For him to notice her, let alone agree with her, was unexpected. "Thanks," Amara replied, unsure of what else to say. Jordan shrugged, his hands stuffed in his pockets. "I don't know. I just think it's messed up, you know? People don't get how hard it can be." Amara nodded, a little stunned by the sincerity in his voice. She wasn't used to people acknowledging her experiences, let alone validating them. "Anyway," Jordan said, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, "I'll see you around." As he walked away, Amara stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. It wasn't much, but it was something. Someone had listened. Someone had seen her. That afternoon, as she walked home, her thoughts were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. On the one hand, she still felt the sting of the comment in class, the reminder that she was different, that she didn't belong. But on the other hand, Jordan's words lingered in her mind. Maybe not everyone was blind to what she was going through. Maybe there were people who understood, who cared. Still, the weight of everything that had happened over the past week pressed down on her. She had been excluded from the campaign, subtly dismissed in class, and reminded time and again that she was different. The microaggressions, the assumptions, the invisibility, it all added up to a heavy burden she carried alone. That evening, as she sat at the dinner table with her parents, she couldn't bring herself to tell them about what had happened at school. They had sacrificed so much for her to be there, and the last thing she wanted to do was make them feel like their sacrifices were in vain. Instead, she smiled and nodded as her father asked about her day, pretending that everything was fine. But as she lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, she knew things had to change. She couldn't keep living like this, pretending that the exclusion didn't hurt, that the racial profiling wasn't real. She had to find a way to stand up, not just for herself, but for others who might be going through the same thing. It was in that moment, in the quiet darkness of her room, that Amara made a decision. She wasn't going to let them silence her anymore. She was going to run for class president, not because she thought she could win, but because she needed to prove to herself and to everyone else that she deserved to be seen. Amara's decision to run for class president was no longer a distant thought. It was real, and she had already begun to feel the ripple of her choice. That morning, as she walked into school, she sensed the eyes on her, the whispers that followed her every move. News had spread fast. No one had expected her to run, not someone who had been largely invisible to the popular crowd. But the fact that she had thrown her name into the ring meant she had decided to be seen, and that made people uncomfortable. She walked with her head high, though inside, doubt was gnawing at her confidence. How would she convince these students to vote for her? How could she, the girl who had been overlooked and dismissed, show them that she could be a leader? As she turned a corner toward her locker, the sounds of laughter from a nearby group of students stopped abruptly. She could feel the weight of their stares as she approached, and her steps slowed instinctively. There they were, Sarah and her friends, leaning against the lockers, eyes wide with curiosity and barely veiled amusement. Sarah's glossy campaign posters lined the walls behind her, full of vibrant colors and catchy slogans like "Leadership with Heart" and "Your Voice, Your Choice." Sarah had the advantage. She was popular, outgoing, and part of the school's social elite. She had always been the front runner for the class president election, and it was clear that the idea of Amara running against her was a source of bewilderment. "Amara," Sarah said, her voice bright but edged with condescension, "I heard you're running for president. That's unexpected." Amara forced a smile, though her heart raced. "Yeah, I am," she said, willing her voice to stay steady. Sarah exchanged a glance with one of her friends, a smirk playing on her lips. "Well, good luck," she said, her tone dripping with insincerity. "You're going to need it." Amara nodded slightly and moved on, her mind reeling. The condescension in Sarah's words lingered with her as she made her way to her first class. She had known it would be tough, but facing this level of dismissiveness so early in the race was harder than she had expected. Still, Amara wasn't the type to back down. She had been underestimated her entire life, and each time she had proven people wrong. This time would be no different. As she entered her history class and took her usual seat at the back, she could feel the tension in her shoulders. The classroom slowly filled with students, most of whom didn't acknowledge her. They were too wrapped up in their own lives, their own conversations, their own plans. Amara found herself wondering if they even knew her name, let alone what she stood for. She pulled out her notebook, trying to focus on the lesson, but her mind kept drifting back to the election. How was she supposed to compete with Sarah and the others when they had the attention of the entire school? She wasn't one for grand speeches or flashy campaign tactics. All she had was her determination to make things better, not just for herself but for everyone who felt unseen, unheard, and excluded. Amara? The sound of her name pulled her out of her thoughts. She looked up to see Jordan standing beside her desk, his backpack slung casually over one shoulder. He smiled down at her, his eyes warm and genuine, and for a moment the tension in her chest eased. "Hey," she said, surprised. Jordan wasn't someone she had ever spoken to much. He was friendly, sure, but he was also part of the popular crowd, the kind of guy who effortlessly fit in wherever he went. She hadn't expected him to talk to her, let alone seek her out. "I heard you're running for class president," Jordan said, leaning against the desk next to hers. His tone was casual, but there was something in his expression that told her he wasn't just making small talk. Amara hesitated, unsure of how to read the situation. "Yeah, I am," she said cautiously. "Surprised?" Jordan laughed softly. "Not really. I think it's cool. This school needs someone like you." Amara blinked, taken aback. "Someone like me?" Jordan nodded, his expression serious now. "Yeah, someone who actually cares about more than just winning. I've seen how Sarah and the others run their campaigns. It's all about popularity and promises they probably won't keep. But you? I think you actually want to make a difference." Amara stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. For so long, she had felt invisible, like no one really saw her or understood her. But here was Jordan, a guy she barely knew, telling her that he believed in her, that he saw something in her worth supporting. "I don't know if I can win," Amara admitted quietly, her vulnerability slipping through her carefully maintained composure. Jordan's eyes softened. "It's not just about winning. It's about showing people that you belong here, that your voice matters. Whether you win or not, just running shows people that you're not afraid to stand up for what you believe in. And that's something they'll remember." His words struck a chord deep within her. It wasn't that she had never believed in herself, but hearing someone else say it, someone like Jordan, made it feel real. She didn't have to win to make an impact. She just had to show people that she was there, that she wasn't going to fade into the background anymore. Amara smiled, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "Thanks, Jordan. That really means a lot." Jordan grinned back at her, his usual easygoing demeanor returning. "Hey, If you need help with your campaign, let me know. I'm pretty good with posters and stuff." Amara laughed, the tension in her chest easing for the first time all day. "I might take you up on that." The bell rang, signaling the start of class, and Jordan gave her a quick nod before heading to his seat. As the lesson began, Amara found herself feeling lighter, more confident. Jordan's words had given her the push she needed to keep going, to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could do this. Later that day, as Amara sat in the school library working on her campaign materials, she felt a sense of determination growing within her. She wasn't going to let Sarah's snide remarks or the whispers of her classmates stop her. She was running for something bigger than herself, for every student who had ever felt overlooked or dismissed, for every voice that had been silenced. As she worked, Miss Wallace, her history teacher, approached her table. Miss Wallace had always been one of Amara's favorite teachers, wise, patient, and always ready to offer a kind word or advice. "I heard you're running for class president," Miss Wallace said, sitting down across from her. Amara nodded, surprised by how quickly word had spread. "I am," she said. "I don't know if I'll win, though." Miss Wallace smiled, her eyes twinkling with encouragement. "Winning isn't always the most important part, Amara. Sometimes, just running is a victory in itself. You're showing people that their assumptions about you don't define who you are." Amara nodded slowly, the weight of her teacher's words settling in. It was the same message Jordan had given her earlier, that this campaign wasn't just about the outcome. It was about making a statement, about standing up for herself and for others like her. "Thanks, Miss Wallace," Amara said softly. "I really appreciate that." Miss Wallace patted her hand gently. "You're going to do great, Amara. Just remember, leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the one who listens, who cares, and who makes people feel seen." As Miss Wallace left the library, Amara felt a surge of hope. With Jordan's support and Miss Wallace's guidance, she knew she wasn't alone in this. She had people who believed in her, who saw her potential, and that made all the difference. That evening, as Amara worked late into the night on her campaign posters and ideas, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't felt before. This wasn't just about proving Sarah or anyone else wrong. It was about proving to herself that she had a place in this school, that she could make a difference. And with people like Jordan and Miss Wallace by her side, she knew that, no matter what happened, she wouldn't be standing alone. Amara stood in front of the bathroom mirror the next morning, taking a deep breath as she stared at her reflection. Today was the day she'd officially start her campaign. The posters were done, thanks to Jordan's artistic flair, and she had spent the weekend rehearsing her speech with Miss Wallace's guidance. Now, all that was left was to put herself out there, vulnerable and exposed, for the entire school to judge. Her heart pounded in her chest, the weight of what she was about to do pressing down on her. What if she stumbled over her words? What if no one took her seriously? Worse, what if people just didn't care? But beneath all the fear, there was a spark of determination. She had made it this far. She couldn't turn back now. "Remember why you're doing this," Amara whispered to herself, her voice steadying with each word. "This isn't about them. It's about you. It's about showing them that you belong." With one last glance in the mirror, she grabbed her backpack and headed out the door, bracing herself for the day ahead. The school hallways were buzzing with energy when she arrived, as they always were during election season. Campaign posters lined the walls, and flyers were scattered across every surface. As she walked to her locker, she passed by Sarah's table, where her friends were busy handing out buttons and candy in exchange for promises of votes. Sarah herself stood in the center, all smiles and charm, effortlessly commanding attention. Amara didn't stop. She kept her eyes forward, clutching the rolled-up posters in her hand as she made her way to her own campaign table. Jordan was already there, waiting with a stack of flyers and a grin that put her at ease. His presence, calm and steady, gave her the confidence she needed. "Ready for this?" he asked, handing her a flyer. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, her smile tentative but real. Together they began setting up the table. Amara unrolled her posters, each one displaying her simple but heartfelt message, a voice for all. It wasn't flashy like Sarah's leadership with heart or Jason's stronger together, but it reflected exactly what Amara stood for. Her campaign wasn't about making empty promises or playing to popularity. It was about representing the students who felt left out, who didn't have a voice in the decisions that affected them every day. As they finished setting up, students began trickling into the hallway, eyeing her table with curiosity. A few walked by without stopping, but some approached cautiously, taking a flyer or nodding politely as they passed. Amara could feel the judgment in their gazes, the unspoken questions hanging in the air. Who was she to think she could win? What made her think she could challenge Sarah or Jason? Despite the whispers and sidelong glances, Amara stood tall. She handed out flyers, smiled, and spoke to anyone who approached her table. Jordan was by her side, his easygoing charm helping to draw people in, and slowly but surely, students began to take notice. A group of girls from Amara's English class approached the table, their expressions curious but guarded. One of them, a girl named Chloe, picked up a flyer and scanned it quickly before looking up at Amara. "So, you're running for class president?" Chloe asked, her tone skeptical but not unkind. Amara nodded. "I am." Chloe tilted her head, considering. "Why? I mean, no offense, but you've never really been involved in student government before." Amara took a deep breath, preparing herself for this question. She had anticipated it. "I haven't been involved because, to be honest, I didn't think there was a place for me. But that's why I'm running. I want to create a space where everyone feels like they belong, where every student has a voice, not just the ones who are already popular or well-known." Chloe's expression softened slightly. "That's actually a good point. I've never really thought about it that way." "Neither had I," Amara admitted. "But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how many people feel the same way I do, like they don't really matter when it comes to decisions in this school. I want to change that." For a moment, Chloe didn't say anything. Then she nodded slowly. "I respect that. I'll think about it." Amara smiled, her chest swelling with hope. "Thanks, Chloe. That means a lot." As Chloe and her friends walked away, Amara turned to Jordan, her heart racing with excitement. "Did you hear that? She's actually considering voting for me." Jordan grinned, clapping her on the shoulder. "Of course she is. You're making people think. That's what matters." The rest of the day followed a similar pattern. Some students stopped by the table out of curiosity, others out of skepticism, but by the end of the day, Amara had made her presence known. People were talking about her campaign, about her message, her sincerity, and the way she wasn't trying to win with popularity, but with purpose. But the real challenge came at the end of the day, during the assembly where all the candidates would give their speeches. Amara sat backstage, her palms sweaty, as the other candidates lined up in front of her. Sarah was near the front, casually chatting with her friends, as if this were just another social event. Jason stood confidently, running through his speech on his phone one last time. Everyone else seemed calm, collected, like they had done this 100 times before. Amara, on the other hand, felt like she was about to walk into a battlefield. Jordan, standing next to her, noticed her anxiety and gave her a reassuring nudge. "You've got this, Amara. Just be yourself. That's all you need to do." She nodded, but her heart still raced. What if she forgot her speech? What if she stumbled over her words in front of the whole school? She had worked so hard to get here, and the last thing she wanted was to let herself and everyone who believed in her down. The principal called the assembly to order, and the candidates began to take the stage one by one. Sarah's speech was exactly what everyone had expected: polished, confident, full of promises to make the school a more fun and exciting place. Jason's was similar, focusing on unity and school spirit. The audience clapped and cheered for both, their popularity ensuring they had the crowd's support. And then it was Amara's turn. She took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage, the bright lights blinding her momentarily as she faced the sea of students. Her legs trembled beneath her, but she forced herself to stand tall. The microphone felt heavy in her hand, but she tightened her grip and cleared her throat. "Hi everyone," she began, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "My name is Amara, and I'm running for class president." There was a brief silence, and Amara could feel the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on her, waiting, judging. She took another deep breath and continued. I know that I'm not the most popular candidate up here, she said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. I haven't been involved in student government before, and I don't have the same kind of visibility as some of the other candidates. But that's exactly why I'm running. Because for too long, this school has been led by the same people, the same voices, and I think it's time for a change. She glanced out at the crowd, searching for Jordan's face. When she found him, sitting near the front with a small, encouraging smile on his face, she felt her nerves start to calm. I'm running because I believe that every student in this school deserves to have a voice, Amara continued. Not just the ones who are popular or well-known, not just the ones who are already involved in everything. Every single one of us has something to offer, something to contribute, and I want to make sure that everyone feels like they belong here. As she spoke, she could see the expressions in the audience begin to shift. Some students, who had initially looked disinterested, were now sitting up straighter, their attention focused on her. Others were nodding along, their faces softening as they listened to her words. I know I'm not the most obvious choice, Amara said, her voice steady now. But if you give me the chance, I promise to be a president who listens, a president who cares, a president who fights for every student, not just the ones at the top. When she finished, the silence hung in the air for a moment before the applause started, soft at first, but then growing louder, more enthusiastic. Amara blinked, surprised by the reaction, and a wave of relief washed over her. She had done it. She had spoken her truth, and people were listening. As she left the stage, Jordan was waiting for her in the wings, a wide grin on his face. You crushed it, he said, clapping her on the back. I told you. Amara smiled, her heart full. Thanks, Jordan. I couldn't have done it without you. That evening, as Amara walked home, the cool evening air filled her lungs with a sense of renewal. No matter what happened in the election, she knew she had already won, in a way that mattered to her. She had found her voice. And for the first time, she believed that others were beginning to hear it too. Election day dawned bright and crisp, the kind of fall morning that held a sense of promise in the air. Amara stood at the bus stop, watching her breath form small clouds in the chilly air, her mind racing with thoughts of what the day would hold. Today was the culmination of weeks of hard work, self-doubt, and courage. The school was buzzing with energy as the class president election finally arrived, and every student could feel the tension that hung in the air. Amara knew she had done everything she could. Her speech at the assembly had been well received, and word had spread that she was running a campaign based on authenticity, inclusion, and change. She hadn't tried to compete with Sarah's flashy promises or Jason's talk of school spirit. Instead, she focused on listening to her classmates, hearing their concerns, and letting them know that she was someone who would represent all of them, not just the most visible. As she walked into the school building that morning, Amara felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. Win or lose, she had already achieved something important. She had proven to herself and to others that she could stand up and be heard, that she was more than the quiet girl in the background. She had run a campaign based on principles, not popularity, and that was something to be proud of. The hallways were packed with students making their way to the gym where the voting booths had been set up. Election day at the school was a big deal. Students treated it like a mini holiday, an excuse to skip a little bit of class and cast their votes for the student council. The energy was palpable, and Amara could feel the nerves buzzing inside her like a live wire. She spotted Jordan near the gym doors, handing out her flyers with his usual easygoing smile. His support had been one of the most unexpected and gratifying parts of the whole experience. He had believed in her when she had doubted herself, and his presence reminded her that she wasn't alone in this. Hey, future president, Jordan said with a grin as she approached. How are you feeling? Amara smiled nervously, shaking her head. I don't know. Nervous, excited, terrified, all of the above. You've got this, Jordan said firmly. No matter what happens, you've already made a difference. People are talking about you, about what you stand for. That's huge. Amara nodded, taking a deep breath to calm her racing heart. Thanks, Jordan. I just hope I did enough. You did more than enough, he replied, giving her a reassuring pat on the shoulder. Now it's up to them. The voting process was surprisingly quick. Students filed into the gym, marked their ballots, and dropped them into the large boxes set up at the front of the room. Amara waited her turn, standing in line with other students, some of whom gave her encouraging smiles, while others avoided eye contact. She had never been more aware of how much she wanted this, not just for herself, but for every student who had ever felt overlooked or underestimated. When it was finally her turn, Amara took a deep breath and stepped up to the booth. She picked up the pencil and stared down at the ballot, her name listed alongside Sarah's and Jason's. For a brief moment, doubt washed over her. Was she really ready for this? Was she capable of being the leader these students needed? But then she thought about everything she had been through to get here. The exclusion, the quiet prejudice, the whispers behind her back. She thought about the students who had come up to her in the past week, thanking her for running, telling her that she had inspired them to speak up. She thought about the look in Jordan's eyes when he told her that she could make a difference. Amara marked the box next to her name, her hands steady now, and dropped her ballot into the box. No matter what happened next, she knew she had done her best. That had to be enough. The rest of the day was a blur. Classes went on as usual, but no one was really focused on the lessons. Everyone was waiting for the results, the anticipation hanging over the school like a cloud. Amara tried to distract herself with her work, but her mind kept wandering back to the election. She couldn't help but wonder how many students had voted for her. Had her message resonated? Had they seen her for who she really was? By the time the final bell rang, the tension was almost unbearable. The principal had announced that the results would be revealed during a special assembly at the end of the day, and the entire school gathered in the gym once again. The air buzzed with excitement and nerves as students filled the bleachers, whispering and speculating about who would win. Amara sat near the front, Jordan by her side, her heart pounding in her chest. She scanned the crowd, catching sight of Sarah and Jason seated a few rows away. Sarah looked confident as ever, smiling and chatting with her friends, while Jason sat quietly, his face unreadable. They both seemed so sure of themselves, so certain that the race would come down to one of them. But Amara wasn't so sure. She had felt something shift in the school over the past few weeks. Something subtle but real. Students who had never noticed her before were paying attention now. They were starting to see that leadership wasn't just about popularity or school spirit. It was about making everyone feel like they mattered. The principal stepped up to the podium, microphone in hand, and the gym fell silent. Amara's stomach twisted into knots as she waited, every second feeling like an eternity. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. The results of the class president election, the principal announced, her voice ringing through the gym. It was a close race, and I'm proud of all the candidates for running strong campaigns. But in the end, there can only be one winner. Amara held her breath, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She didn't dare look at Jordan or anyone else. She just stared straight ahead, her heart pounding in her ears. The winner of this year's class president election is... Time seemed to slow to a crawl. The principal paused for dramatic effect, and Amara thought her heart might explode. Amara James. For a split second, Amara didn't register the words. It was like her brain had frozen, unable to process what she had just heard. But then the gym erupted into applause, and she felt Jordan grab her shoulder, shaking her excitedly. You did it! You won! Amara blinked, stunned, her body frozen in place as the realization slowly sank in. She had won. She had actually won. The principal smiled down at her from the podium. Congratulations, Amara. Please come up to the stage. Amara stood on shaky legs, her heart pounding as she made her way to the front of the gym. The applause was overwhelming, the sound filling her ears as she walked up the steps and accepted the microphone from the principal. She turned to face the crowd, her eyes scanning the sea of faces that had once seemed so distant and unreachable. Now, they were looking at her with something else. Respect, recognition. She was no longer invisible. Thank you, Amara began, her voice trembling slightly but growing stronger with each word. I can't even begin to express how grateful I am for this opportunity. I ran this campaign because I believe that every student in this school deserves to be seen, to be heard, and to be represented. I promise that as your president, I will do everything I can to make sure that happens." The crowd cheered again, and Amara smiled, her heart full. She had done it. She had proven to herself, and to everyone else, that she was capable of leading, of making a difference. And now, she had the chance to do just that. As the assembly ended and students began filing out of the gym, Sarah approached Amara. For the first time since the campaign had started, there was no smugness or condescension in her expression. Instead, she offered a small, almost grudging smile. "Congrats, Amara," Sarah said, her tone surprisingly sincere. "You earned it." Amara nodded, offering a polite smile in return. "Thanks, Sarah." As Sarah walked away, Amara felt a strange sense of closure. There was no need for bitterness or rivalry. The election was over, and in the end the students had chosen her because they believed in what she stood for. That was all that mattered. Jordan appeared at her side, grinning from ear to ear. "President Amara James, how does it feel?" Amara laughed, her heart light. "It feels incredible." They walked out of the gym together, the crisp fall air greeting them as they stepped outside. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the school grounds, and for the first time in a long time, Amara felt like she truly belonged. As they made their way down the sidewalk, Amara couldn't help but think about how far she had come. From being excluded and overlooked, to standing up for herself and running for something bigger than her fears, she had faced every challenge head-on. And now, she was class president. It wasn't just about winning the election. It was about the journey that had brought her here. It was about karma in a way. Those who had once dismissed her, who had seen her as nothing more than an outsider, were now watching her rise to a position of leadership. But it wasn't about revenge or proving anyone wrong. It was about showing that kindness, persistence, and authenticity could triumph over prejudice and exclusion. And as the first black girl to ever hold the position of class president at her school, Amara knew that she was paving the way for others like her. She had shattered the barriers that had once held her back, and she was determined to make sure no one else would ever feel the way she had felt. This was just the beginning. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Click on the video now to watch. We appreciate your support, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.